The world awoke to chaos as news alerts flashed across screens just after dawn. Urgent notifications lighting up phones and televisions, shattering the early morning calm with a single chilling message. War had erupted. Thailand and Cambodia, two neighbors with a long and complicated history, were suddenly locked in heavy clashes along their disputed border. What began as a tense standoff between rival patrols quickly spiraled out of control, erupting into open warfare. The fragile peace that had held for years was shattered in an instant, replaced by the thunder of gunfire and the chaos of battle. The initial reports were confused and frantic, gunfire echoing through the dense jungle, mortar shells exploding in the distance, and casualty counts rising with every passing hour. Radios crackled with desperate calls for reinforcements and medics. The quiet, mist-shrouded hills that straddled the border, once home to farmers and wildlife, were transformed overnight into a deadly battlefield. Camouflaged troops moved silently through the undergrowth, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. The air, once thick with the scent of rain and earth, now reeked of cordite smoke and fear. The sounds of nature were drowned out by the relentless crack of rifles and the distant thud of artillery. Around the globe, people watched in shock and disbelief as two nations with centuries of shared culture and intertwined destinies turned their guns on each other. The world's attention, often elsewhere, was suddenly fixed on this volatile frontier. Dozens were reported dead in the opening hours, soldiers and civilians alike. Hospitals filled with the wounded, and the death toll continued to climb as the fighting intensified. Images broadcast around the world showed plumes of black smoke rising from burning villages, families fleeing in terror, and military convoys racing down rural roads toward the front lines. News channels in both Bangkok and Phnom Penh delivered grave updates, their rhetoric growing more urgent and uncompromising by the minute. The language of diplomacy was replaced by the language of war. In the cities, nationalism surged. Crowds gathered in the streets, waving flags and chanting slogans, their voices drowning out the few who still called for restraint and dialogue. For years, the border had been a line of tension and friction. Now, it was a war zone, patrolled by heavily armed soldiers and scarred by the violence of sudden conflict. Thousands of families fled their homes with little more than what they could carry, seeking refuge in makeshift shelters and crowded evacuation centers. Their lives were upended in a single night, their futures uncertain. International journalists rushed to the scene, broadcasting the grim reality to a world that could no longer ignore this once-forgotten front line. The conflict had become a global story, demanding attention and action. Tonight, as the world watches and waits, we ask, how did it come to this? What forces brought two nations to the brink, and what hope remains for peace? If you like my video, then subscribe my channel and press the bell icon for more updates. The violence began not with a gunshot, but with a diplomatic breakdown that sent shockwaves through both nations. Tensions had simmered for months, with uneasy meetings and failed negotiations, but the final rupture came quietly, behind closed doors, in the corridors of power, where words failed and suspicion took hold. Both countries expelled each other's diplomats, a dramatic gesture that signaled the collapse of peaceful communication. Embassies were emptied, and the last lines of dialogue snapped, leaving only uncertainty and fear in their wake. The fragile peace shattered when 3 Thai soldiers were injured by landmines in a disputed border area. Bangkok immediately condemned the incident as a hostile act, and the news spread rapidly, fueling outrage and anxiety on both sides of the border. In response, Thailand reinforced its military presence near the ancient Preah Vihear Temple, a site already steeped in historical tension. Cambodia, unwilling to appear weak, matched the buildup with its own troops, and the border became a stage for a dangerous show of force. The atmosphere was electric with tension. At Preah Vihear Temple, heavily armed soldiers from both sides faced each other in a hyper-militarized standoff. It was here, amid ancient stones and modern weapons, that the first shots finally rang out. What began as a small arms exchange quickly spiraled out of control. Mortars and artillery thundered across the jungle, and explosions sent plumes of smoke rising above the treetops. The violence spread rapidly along the border, engulfing new areas with each passing hour. Within hours, both armies were locked in heavy combat. Military vehicles advanced under fire, and the border was transformed into a chaotic battlefield, with neither side willing to back down. As the sounds of war echoed for miles, panic swept through nearby villages. Civilians grabbed what they could and fled, families piling into trucks or running on foot to escape the violence. The fear was palpable, and the roads filled with desperate people seeking safety. Entire communities were emptied almost overnight. Streets that once bustled with daily life became eerily silent, homes left abandoned with doors swinging open. The border region was transformed into a series of ghost towns, haunted by the sudden absence of their residents. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, frantic diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the crisis faltered. Mistrust ran deep, and historical grievances resurfaced, making compromise impossible. Each failed negotiation only deepened the sense of inevitability. On the ground, every move was watched with suspicion. Each side interpreted the other's actions as preparations for a larger attack, fueling a cycle of escalation that neither could control. The situation was volatile. A single spark was all it took to ignite the dry tinder of resentment and fear that had built up over years. Now, the borderlands were engulfed in violence. Smoke and flames marked the landscape, and the scars of conflict spread across villages and fields, leaving devastation in their wake. In Bangkok, officials insisted Thailand was the victim of a Cambodian attack. They cited the landmine incident and claimed Cambodia fired first, framing their response as self-defense. Thai leaders accused Cambodia of using the dispute to distract from internal problems. In Phnom Penh, the story was reversed. Cambodia accused Thailand of invading and shelling their territory. Cambodian leaders called their response a reluctant defense of the motherland, highlighting civilian suffering. Both sides released images and statements blaming the other for destruction and escalation. In this war of words, each nation saw itself as the defender, leaving no room for compromise. This was modern warfare, not a border skirmish. Artillery and rocket systems pounded military and civilian areas, turning farmland into moonscapes. The Royal Thai Air Force launched airstrikes on alleged Cambodian positions. Cambodia claimed civilian areas were hit. Cambodia retaliated with heavy artillery and rocket barrages. The fighting became a deadly duel across jungle terrain. Both sides released footage of destroyed vehicles and burning outposts. Soldiers hunkered in trenches as relentless shelling shook the earth. No one near the front was safe. Scorched earth tactics left forests burning and infrastructure shattered. The conflict had become a violent contest of national will, with devastating consequences. For Sunan, a humble rice farmer living on the Thai side of the border, the day began quietly, just like any other. The sun rose over the lush green fields, casting a golden glow on the dew-covered rice paddies. Birds chirped and the gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and growing crops. In the distance, the village slowly came to life, with neighbors greeting each other and children laughing as they prepared for school. But that peaceful morning was shattered in an instant. The distant rumble of tanks and the sudden roar of explosions tore through the calm, sending shockwaves of fear through the village. Gunfire erupted, echoing off the hills, and panic swept over the villagers. People screamed and scattered, desperately searching for loved ones as chaos unfolded all around them. Sunan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his wife and children, urging them to run. Together with their neighbors, they fled as shells whistled overhead. The sky lit up with flashes of fire and smoke. The roads quickly became jammed with families on foot, clutching infants and supporting elders. Some carried only what they could hold, others had nothing but the clothes on their backs. All were desperate to escape the violence. As they hurried past familiar homes, Sunan saw his neighbor's house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now reduced to rubble, a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. But Sunan forced himself to focus on his own children, holding them close and pushing forward through the chaos, determined to keep them safe no matter what. Eventually they reached a crowded evacuation center. It was noisy and cramped, filled with families just like theirs, safe for now, but with nothing left except each other. Their home, their farm, and all their livestock had been left behind, abandoned in their rush to survive. The life they had built was now just a memory. That night Sunan sat on a thin mat in the shelter, his family huddled close, exhausted and uncertain about what tomorrow would bring. He gazed out at the horizon, wondering if they would ever return home, or if their lives had been changed forever. Sunan knew he was just one of thousands. Ordinary civilians caught in a conflict they never chose, forced to leave everything behind in search of safety. Their future was as uncertain as the border itself. War had upended everything, leaving only questions and a longing for peace. As fighting intensified, the world responded with alarm. The US urged restraint and offered diplomatic support, careful not to take sides. China called for a ceasefire, working behind the scenes to prevent escalation. ASEAN, led by Malaysia, called an emergency meeting, seeing the conflict as a threat to regional stability. The crisis tested ASEAN's credibility and the limits of international diplomacy. Global powers rivals elsewhere were united in wanting to contain the conflict. The pressure was on both nations to step back from the brink. At the heart of the dispute is the Preah Vihear Temple, a symbol of national pride for both countries. The 1962 International Court of Justice ruling gave the temple to Cambodia, but left the surrounding land in dispute. Tensions reignited in 2008 when Cambodia listed the temple as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, sparking nationalist outrage in Thailand. Military clashes followed, and in 2013, the ICJ clarified Cambodia's sovereignty over the promontory. Yet, the border remains ambiguous, and nationalist sentiments run deep. The temple, perched on a cliff, is both a place of worship and a flashpoint for conflict. Legal rulings have not resolved the emotional and political stakes. The site remains a powerful symbol and a source of violence. The border dispute's roots stretch back to colonial times. French colonial maps placed Preah Vihear in Cambodia, but Thailand never fully accepted this. World War II saw Thailand briefly reclaim territory, only to return it after the war. Decades of political instability and war stalled efforts to demarcate the border. A joint boundary commission made little progress, especially near Preah Vihear. The lack of a clear, agreed border allowed grievances to fester. Nationalist politics on both sides kept the dispute alive. The border remains a permanent source of tension. The human cost is staggering: over 60 soldiers and a dozen civilians dead, 50,000 displaced. Makeshift camps now house families with shattered lives. Cambodia called for UN intervention. Thailand pushed for ASEAN mediation. Both governments face pressure from hardliners, making compromise difficult. The crisis raises questions about managing post-colonial borders and preventing nationalist-fueled wars. Can international or regional bodies bring peace? The answers remain elusive as gunfire echoes across the border. The immediate challenge: silence the guns and restart talks. Lasting peace will require courage, compromise, and a willingness to move beyond history. For thousands displaced and soldiers on the front, peace cannot come soon enough.